I'm Lisa Van Dusen, and this is First Person. Welcome. And today I'm here with Jane Shaw, who is the Dean of Religious Life and Professor of Religious Studies at Stanford University. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you very much, Lisa. It's great to talk to you.
I'd like to talk with you about some of your practices, kind of what you do every day.
So you're talking about spiritual practices in a way.
I'm talking about any practices.
Okay. I'm ordained as a priest in the Church of England, and the equivalent is the Episcopal Church here in the States. And one of the things I committed to doing, swore an oath I think to doing at my ordination, was saying morning and evening prayer from the Book of Common Prayer, which is the Anglican prayer book, every day. So I do try and make space early in the morning and late at night to do that. When I was obviously at Grace Cathedral, there was a community with which I did that. So now I do it solo again. Now I'm back at Stanford.
You've just moved from San Francisco down to Stanford.
Yep.
And is there anything that strikes you as really being different here?
Yes. The weather is much better. It was very foggy in San Francisco. It's hardly ever foggy here. But more seriously, I think I'm very struck by the entrepreneurial spirit, which is really, that's what this place is about. And it's extraordinary to be in the middle of it. And of course, that's partly in San Francisco. Many Silicon Valley people live in San Francisco, but there is something about being in the middle of it that that's almost the air you breathe here. And it is amazing, actually.
Let's go back a little bit to kind of earlier in your life. Are there particular people or a person or a particular experience, a moment maybe, that really was formative for you?
Well, I have this dual life as both a scholar and a priest, which is a pretty age-old tradition, but less frequently observed perhaps these days. And so there were a number of people in my childhood and in my academic development who, in a way, exemplified that. So when I was 16 and living in Norwich, which is where I grew up in England, very close to Norwich Cathedral, very beautiful place, I was friendly with the Dean of the Cathedral's daughter. And the Dean at that time was both a priest and a scholar. And I sort of thought, oh, that's interesting. Clocked it away, right? And that was the same year I joined the movement for the ordination of women, because women were not ordained then. It was also when, of course, I was thinking about going to college, and I then went to Oxford. And there have been mentors along the way since I became an academic too. The most obvious is a wonderful, dear, my closest friend, a man called Vincent Strudwick, who exemplifies the spiritual life and the academic life in one. Another great mentor was a wonderful church historian called Henry Chadwick, an amazing man who is no longer alive. So there are these people who have exemplified that way of living, that these two things can belong together.
You're going to be teaching a class this coming year.
Yep.
Could you talk about that?
Yes. So at Stanford, part of my role is to be Dean for Religious Life with everything that involves, and we can talk about that if you like. But also I'm a professor of religious studies. So I've chosen to teach a class about empathy because I'm extremely interested in how we get to know the other. How do we make the leap to the other's experience? We can never have that experience, but how do we, in a way, almost train ourselves to begin to try and walk in another's shoes? That, of course, is the great wonder of a liberal arts or humanities education, is that you begin to get the skills to do that. But I thought maybe in this place where 40% of the undergraduates do computer science, it would be good to teach a class on empathy, which will go from Buddhist compassion, the parables of Christianity, to the moral philosophy of the 18th century, to the neuroscience of empathy.
And to whom will you be teaching that class?
I think anyone who shows up.
What are some lessons learned for you? What are some things where maybe things didn't go according to plan, or just plain didn't work? I mean, we talk about failure in this valley, and how has that shaped how you've moved forward with your life?
That's a good question, and I don't quite know how to answer it, except I think it's not so much failure, and that sounds extremely arrogant. It's more about doing too much all at once. So I think there have been numerous situations where I've just absolutely worked all the time in order to get something done often get something done for an institution. I've always worked for institutions. I believe in institutions. I'm very loyal to the institutions I work for. But in the end, I sometimes think, oh, I could have taken that at a gentler pace. I could have let myself and the team have a slightly easier time of it at that moment. So it's about getting the balance right in life. I do try to get that balance right. But sometimes, if you're working to a deadline, you can't. But trying to just slow down sometimes for me.
Well, do you think that, in this valley, the pace is very rapid.
Yes.
How would you advise people here at Stanford or otherwise to do that when you see, the what's at stake?
Yeah.
How do you really do that?
I think, one of the things I've learned is that if you go too fast, you think less clearly, and you certainly are less imaginative and creative. So you have to have sort of space in the day, right? And I try and do that, as I've already said, in the morning and the evening. But I also think there's something to wandering about in the garden, pulling up the weeds, right, and just having a look at it and seeing which plants are not growing or pruning the roses. I think there's something to just having almost slightly blank space. So let me tell you about something wonderful at Stanford, which has just opened for the students and faculty and staff, and that's called the Windover Contemplation Center. And it's this very beautiful space, device-free, maybe the only device-free place in Silicon Valley, with these wonderful paintings by Nathan Olivero, and a very beautiful building open to people from 9 o'clock in the morning till 11 at night. And that comes under the remit of the Office for Religious Life. That's all part of what we're trying to do at Stanford, I think, to create the whole student. So I would encourage people to take those spaces in the day, because I think in the end you're more efficient and more creative, actually.
What do you wish people were thinking about more, talking about more, and maybe it's doing less or not talking as much, but what do you wish was sort of more on people's minds?
I think the great crisis of our day is climate change and the environment. So I rather hope that more people would take that seriously and begin to think and reflect on what they are doing with their own lives, how they can bring some pressure to bear to change things. So that's, I think, the big issue of the day. I hope that more people are taking more space out, of course, absolutely, and that's what one should be saying from this department, right? That some kind of practice, it doesn't necessarily have to be a strict religious practice or even a spiritual practice, but some practice that enables you to have balance in the day, of course. But if you want the issue of the day that I think people should be more concerned about perhaps than some are, climate change.
And what might that look like? How does concern, you've been somebody who's looked at practical religion. How might that be practical?
I think it's about making your own personal audit of what one does. I think it's about bringing some pressure to bear in local communities about what's done. I think it's about bringing pressure to bear nationally and globally. And one has to find one's level of that. Not everyone's going to do everything, but I think everyone should be doing something. I would hope everyone would be doing something. But there are still some people we have to convince too, right? They don't get it.
What do you see on the horizon?
Well, I think we are obviously in the midst of this massive technological shift. And so I can't predict, because I'm not a computer scientist, what that will entail. But we may also begin to see the ways in which the limits of that technological shift, or the ways in which it's taking us places we don't want to go, or the ways in which it's not going to solve the world's problems even though we think it is, right? There was that moment at the end of the 19th century, at the end of the Industrial Revolution, the Gilded Age, right, where we thought everything's going swimmingly. And then World War I happened and shattered it all. I certainly hope we don't have a world war to shatter it all, but certainly there was, in any case, the beginnings of a kind of dissatisfaction with that sense of apparent progress. And I think, these rhythms do happen like that. So I'm sure there'll be some sense of what is it that technology really can do for us and what can it not do for us.
And how do you see that that tension, in a way, playing out here on a campus where technology is so dominant?
Well, I think this is a perfect place for it to be worked out, because you have, I hope, people who are at the forefront of technological innovation talking with people who are ethicists or people who are working for peace or political scientists or historians who can point out patterns. So, I mean, I think this is exactly the place we should be having that conversation, actually. I hope we will. I think we do sometimes.
Jean, what might surprise people about you?
I think people are always slightly surprised that I'm not very churchy as a person. You know, I don't think church is to be more churchy. I think church is about anyone should be welcome. I'm really interested in how you welcome many different kind of constituencies in, certainly not to convert them, not even necessarily to do religion all the time. When I was at Grace Cathedral, you know, I brought a lot of art and public education to the cathedral, and I'm hoping we might do some of that in Memorial Church here. You know, just what does this beautiful space mean to people? How can we talk with each other about the most important issues of the day? How can our senses be enlarged, our visions enlarged by art? All of that interests me, and that doesn't make me very churchy. The other thing that might surprise people is I did get thrown out of the Brownies when I was 8. And I was bored, actually, so I kept challenging the Brownie leader about, could we not do more interesting things? We just did lots of cutting out of shapes out of cardboard, which is very boring when you're 8. Fortunately, my mother had not yet bought the uniform, so it was okay. It happened early on. I was only there for about 3 weeks.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Lisa.